and welcome to Scholars Hub at Home. I am Carrie Williams, Associate Director of Alumni Events at York University. Thank you so much for joining us for today's lecture. It's titled The Latest United Nations Climate Report, Accelerating the Energy Transition with Ellie Perkins, Professor in the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change. I accept the responsibility to acknowledge the land I am on. Hi, Professor Perkins. I have a few more opening remarks. You're welcome to stay on screen if you want, or you can go off. It's up to you. So I accept the responsibility for the land that I am on, and because we're not all gathered in the same place, the land I'm about to acknowledge might not be for the territory that you are currently on. So please take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you're on, and the website native-land.ca is a good resource for this. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships on the land upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of the institution. York acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat, and it is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement to peaceably care and share for the Great Lakes region. I'm excited to tell you that we recently celebrated alumni that graduated in 2020 and 2021, as well as welcomed the 2022 class of graduating students to the alumni family. They join yourselves along with a community of 350,000 grads, and their impact and accomplishments continue to create positive change at home and all over the world. We do like to conduct a quick poll before our session begins. Our lecture begins. The question is, how would you rate your knowledge regarding the topic of today's presentation? The poll should pop up in your screen right now, and I'll give everyone a moment to respond. Okay, so thank you so much for taking the time to do that. The majority, over 50% of you are somewhat informed. So Professor Perkins said she has lots of information to share with you. So we look forward to that. If you need help with the Zoom webinar, please feel free to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and enter your question. Our team is ready to help you. That same button may be used to submit questions for our guest speaker to answer during the Q&A period following today's lecture. Please note that all of your questions and comments are visible to our panelists and staff working behind the scenes. And so we ask that you keep your comments relevant and respectful. Today's talk will be given by Ellie Perkins, Professor in the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change. Professor Perkins, you're welcome to turn your camera on while I finish this introduction. Professor Perkins has authored many publications on feminist ecological economics, climate justice, and participatory governance. Her research and community projects with civil society and university partners address environmental and climate injustice, economic inequities, and the transition to sustainable provisioning. We're so pleased that you're able to join us today. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Kyrie, for that great introduction. Very, very nice. And I would like to start this presentation today with a very short video from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change about this report that has just come out. The last piece of it came out in April. That's the piece that I worked on. So I think I'm going to turn it over to the others to show that video, and then I'll start the presentation that I'm going to give. Thank you. Thanks. So that's just a little bit of PR from the Ipcc, but I think it does give a nice overview of the report overall. So my topic today is this report and its key messages, what it really tells us about how climate change can be mitigated, which is the same thing as accelerating the energy transition. Let's see, I have to get to the next slide. Okay, there we go. So we saw the video, and I just wanted to post the link to the report itself here. The recording of this presentation will be available to everybody, and so you can click on these links or just go IPCC Climate Change Report to 2022 and you will find it. It's long, it's dense, it's got a lot of information in it, and it is yours. It's publicly available. So do feel free to have a look yourself. In early 2018, I was nominated by the Canadian government and invited by the Ipcc, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, to serve as a lead author of this UN climate report. It was published this year, as I said. It's being published this year. The last piece is coming out this August. This is the 6th assessment report, or AR6, since the Ipcc was established in 1988. The table of contents is here, and you can see that our piece of the report, which is the Working Group 3 report, the report on mitigation, has 17 chapters in it. The whole report, Working Group 1, 2, and 3. Working Group 1 is about the science of climate change. Working Group 2's report is about climate adaptation, and this Working Group 3 is about mitigation. There are 721 authors of the overall report, of whom 21 are Canadian. Authors work on chapters of the report in teams of about 12. They're assembled into these 3 working groups, and our Working Group 3 report cites more than 18,000 peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, and other references. I worked on the chapter 5 text, which is about 200 pages long, and we summarized and cited more than 18,000 articles in that 300 pages. So we really had to condense it down and try to get the gist of what that huge literature says about climate mitigation and about the role of demand, services, and social aspects of mitigation in the overall process. And the AR6 is the first time that social sciences have been explicitly included in an IPCC report. The ones up until this round were more focusing on the science and on adaptation and mitigation in a more technical scientific sense. But I think the governments involved, and perhaps on the recommendation of the Ipcc itself, began to realize that, hey, people aren't paying enough attention to what's going on here. Maybe we should bring in some sociologists, psychologists, economists, political scientists to talk about how this mitigation process can really get underway. So we had to summarize all previous social sciences research on these topics. I mean, it was a big challenge, but the title and the mandate of our chapter, chapter 5, as for all of the chapters, were set by international government representatives in part of a consensus process, which took place in 2015. And the title and mandate for our chapter, Demand, Services, and Social Aspects of Mitigation, conveys the idea that it's what people want or demand that drives emissions of greenhouse gases, and that people need the services provided by energy above and beyond human labor, right, in order to have decent standards of living. And the way these well-being needs get met depends on sociopolitical and cultural factors that are appropriate differently in different places of the world, but they're all driven really by social aspects of what people, of the choices people make and of their priority on mitigation. Okay, the process through which the IPCC works is discussed in a number of different places, and I just wanted to show you this graphic novel, which also talks about the process in a quite an accessible way, and discusses all of the complications of the way the IPCC has evolved to do these reports. But besides myself, the authors on the chapter that I worked on, chapter 5, included academics from Thailand, Nigeria, Mexico, India, Germany, Brazil, the UK, France, the US, and Iran. We had only 3 in-person meetings. We mostly met by Zoom early in the morning, Toronto time, in order to make it possible for the people in Thailand and India to join the meeting late in the evening for them, and the people in Mexico and California to also join the meeting very early in the morning for them. The writing process involved 4 drafts, and each draft was reviewed by other experts and government representatives who sequentially reviewed the drafts and provided review comments. We had nearly 60,000 review comments over the 4 drafts, and each of those comments had to be responded to individually and taken into account in the next draft of the report. We kept track of all of this with these huge spreadsheets that each author was responsible for responding to a section of. So it was complicated, right? And also quite impressively transparent and with many layers of consideration from many different perspectives about what we included in the final report. You all probably know that CO2, carbon dioxide, is the main greenhouse gas, but additional emissions from producing and burning fossil fuels and industrial processes, such as methane and nitrous oxide emissions and even water vapor, can also contribute to global warming. So the consensus in the climate change field is to put that all together as CO2 equivalents, taking into account the different impacts of the other gases on global warming. Are there ways to meet human demand and needs for services to make our lives easier at lower or no carbon emissions levels? The answer is, of course, certainly. This is what the low carbon energy transition is all about. It's about meeting our needs for services to make our lives decent and, in fact, better over time, without causing climate change, without producing these emissions that are gradually making our planet uninhabitable, not just for us, but for other living things as well. And this low carbon energy transition is already underway. Every time fuel costs rise, people do figure out how to use fuel more efficiently, how to reduce their consumption of it so that they need to buy less. And that is the market mechanism that carbon taxes accelerate. But what the climate science in the IPCC report, and especially in Working Group 1's report, emphasizes is that these market mechanisms are not working fast enough to save us from catastrophic climate change impacts. Extreme weather, rising sea levels, food and economic crises, and even political breakdown. If you look into the future, or maybe sometimes right now, you can see this is already happening. We cannot just wait for fossil fuel stocks to run out, causing the prices to rise because there won't be any supply. And here I have to point out that the energy transitions in the past, of which there have been several, right? We didn't used to use fossil fuels at all. In the first place, humans burned wood. And but the changes to new fuels and new sources of energy have never been driven by running out of the fuel itself. Instead, people gradually realize that there are better, cleaner, more convenient sources of energy to make their lives easier. So we switched from heavy, labor-intensive firewood to dirty peat and coal, and then to gas and oil, which are piped or trucked from far away. And now the transition is to clean renewables, which are available nearly everywhere, since the sun shines and the wind blows just about everywhere people live. And so renewables are better in many ways. They almost do away with geographical and geopolitical dependence on other jurisdictions. They almost do away with fuel transport costs. Once you have the infrastructure in place, it's low cost, right? Plants that are also part of the energy transition is relying more on plants, which through photosynthesis have this amazing evolutionary way of using sunlight and photosynthesis to grab carbon and nitrogen right out of the air. We don't even see it, but plants can metabolize it, turn it into their physical structures. And those structures are what animals have always used for food, shelter, tools, insulation, and other needs. Right now, in our lifetimes, at this moment in human history, we have the opportunity and the challenge to stop depleting millions of years worth of stored plant-based carbon and instead develop and share efficient ways of equitably meeting our energy needs using infinitely renewable energy sources. We have to accordingly reshape our economies, which are built around maximizing fossil fuel use. And we have to do it quickly within the next 10 to 20 years. Planning this to ensure that jobs, food, shelter, transportation, and well-being for all transition in sync can be seen as a huge and exciting systems problem. So who would have thought that a few years ago that all major auto manufacturers would embrace electric cars within a year or so, or that governments would be supporting electrification of Ontario steel plants and biofuels for airplanes and large-scale wind farms, or that hundreds of thousands of young people would spark weekly protests all over the world calling political leaders to account, or that Indigenous leaders and their supporters would cause North American carbon emissions to drop by more than a quarter in just 2 years. This is what I mean when I say this energy transition, it's already well underway. Most people realize that the energy transition is inevitable and they welcome it. Canadian voters consistently support environmental action, conservation, and climate leadership. Overcoming the lock-in, as we call it in the field, lock-in by vested interests who love the way it works now because that's how they make their profits. And this kind of foot dragging by the people who benefit from the status quo systems is clearly what we have to do. We have to overcome that lock-in, and we do it through grassroots action and voting. We do it every time we get the government to create jobs so that people have livelihoods that are part of the transition, not part of the past fossil-based economy. Strong, incorruptible leadership, I'm talking about everywhere in the world, and job-creating investment in a planned transition are the keys to reducing inequitable impacts on some and hastening the changes that we need, which is a double whammy equity measure, since the most marginalized are also always the ones who are worst hit by climate change. So there are many equity reasons to do this as soon as possible. The energy transition means shorter regional electricity grids fueled by renewables and much greater energy storage, plus more local supply chains for everything, backed up by interconnecting resilience mechanisms among regions for support in emergencies. This implies local control and local decision-making to meet local needs. The services and interpersonal relationships which are central to human well-being have always been grounded in communities at human scale. We're social creatures, we're problem solvers, we're skilled communicators. We can do this. Chapter 5 of the IPCC climate report summarizes the literatures on this from psychology, anthropology, sociology, political science, economics, planning and urban studies, and other fields, other social science fields, with examples of transition innovations that contribute to multiple aspects of well-being at once. In other words, we can multitask while we're doing this. A lot of the climate transition initiatives also meet multiple sustainable development goals at the same time. This table, which I know is very dense, like a lot of my slides, I'm treating you like York undergrads, right? Not like the general public. This table, which is directly from the Working Group 3 report, shows empirical evidence about these synergies among multiple sustainable development goals as part of the energy transition. The darker the blue, the more positive the impacts are. And there are only a few orange sections here, which are medium. The orange is medium negative impact. But you can see that there's a lot of synergies here. Okay, and the other thing that I want to show you about equity is, this is also directly from the report, about how equity, social trust, effective governance, and efficient climate policies are also mutually enhancing, synergistic. What this means is that policies that advance equity and reduce income inequality also help build government's capacity for effective climate governance. Okay, in closing, I just want to share what I think may be the most important message from our chapter and from the Working Group 3 report as a whole. And to do this, I need to summarize some historical background. The benefits and costs of fossil fuel use have never been equitably shared. We who live in the rich countries and our ancestors have enjoyed higher incomes and easier lives ever since coal and oil were first used to fuel the Industrial Revolution, which was accompanied, as we know, by colonialism and the slave trade and other examples of how humans can exacerbate the differences among sections of humanity, right? Violence, grave inequities, global power differentials have been part of fossil fuel-driven economies. You can see that at present, Canadians' average carbon emissions are about 18.6 tons per capita per year. Actually, this diagram doesn't show it quite as bad as it actually is. Most African countries, in contrast, have average per capita carbon equivalent emissions of below 1 ton per capita. In the Caribbean, Latin America, and most of Asia, the average is 2 to 3 tons per capita. European averages are 5 to 9 tons. Only the big oil-producing countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and Australia, which produces a lot of coal, have higher average emissions than the US and Canada. And we are, after all, oil-producing and exporting countries. It takes a lot of energy to get those tar sands oil out of the ground and to send it to markets. So we have a responsibility, I'm going to call this, to address these things as soon as we can. We and our ancestors have benefited. We're benefiting still. Moreover, it's not just some countries that emit much more than others. It's also the wealthy worldwide. There are wealthy people everywhere. And the rich people, the richest 10% of people, you can see, contribute about half of global carbon emissions. They simply consume more and more irresponsibly. Rich people have huge homes, they travel by air frequently, they don't worry about waste as much as poor people do. So these inequities, let me just say one more thing about this diagram. The poorest 50%, who are responsible for only about 10% of total lifetime consumption emissions, need to consume more energy. They need to have access to more ways of increasing their standards of living with agriculture, cooking, food processing, transport, communication, and water provision of water supplies, and to do that more easily and cleanly. So that bottom 50% really need access to shared, clean, low emission technologies in order to increase their standards of living. But it is the rich who have the funds and the ability to reduce their carbon emissions while maintaining a high standard of living. They have to be expected to do so. That means us. We have to expect this of ourselves. It's easy to see that cutting emissions by a massive amount is possible by simply focusing on those who emit most in the first place. We have the finance, we have the research infrastructures to figure this out. We have the ability to maintain our standard of living, but at a lower emission level. This is a technological challenge, but it's also a social and a governance challenge. So I'm getting to the conclusion. One of these three sentences are what I think are quite encouraging and optimistic conclusions of the Ipcc sixth assessment report and of the working group report that I worked on. And this text is straight from the report itself. That it's possible to eradicate extreme poverty, energy poverty, and provide decent living standards to all in the context of achieving sustainable development objectives in the near term without significant global emissions growth. That's the technological piece, and it's making those low emission technologies available to the people who need them. There are also at least 18 countries in the world who have sustained their greenhouse gas and consumption-based emission reductions for longer than 10 years. So some countries have already figured out how to do this. And they do it by changing their energy supply, decarbonizing their grids through energy efficiency and energy demand reduction, meaning people just choose to consume less. Every time you set your thermostat that lower in the summer, lower in the winter, and higher in the summer, you're making a demand-related energy reduction. You're part of this transition. And then finally, this conclusion of the report, by 2050, which is really sort of the end line of when we must do this in order to avoid catastrophic global warming, comprehensive demand-side strategies across all sectors could reduce CO2 emissions globally by 40 to 70%. Individuals with high socioeconomic status contribute disproportionately to emissions and have the highest potential for emissions reductions. As citizens, as investors, consumers, role models, professionals, and in all the ways, as inventors, as workers, as tech folks, as activists, we are all part of this. So we have a key role, especially here in Canada, where we have a long way to go. It's going to be challenging. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but we can all help to share in this work. And I thank you for your interest in this topic and for all you can do. So I'm going to stop sharing now. I think there's questions and
Yes.
chance
Yes.
for discussion. I'm interested in what you have to say.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for that. You know, as we're listening to you, just so thankful to have an author from this document be part of this community to sort of share this and sort of unpack this for us. So just really thankful for your presence here today and for sharing. It's been very helpful, and also for sharing around the intersections and where the responsibility and opportunity actually lies to sort of have an impact on this. So thank you very much. And yes, we do have time for questions. We have some from the audience already. So I'll start with the first one from Silva. The question is using the term climate change rather than global warming diminishing the seriousness of global warming?
That's a good question, and there's a lot of discussion about the right terminology. I think we're moving now into a phase of the energy transition where people recognize that it is about global warming. Climate change tends to just kind of package it in a way that it's easy to put on the shelf and think, oh, this doesn't really relate to me. But when you talk about global warming, then it's understood that this affects everybody. It affects all of us. And of course, from a climate justice perspective, it affects some people more than others. So my issue with terminologies like the Anthropocene or, we're all in this together, that is really not exactly true. As I tried to say in the report, there are some people that are way more responsible and have benefited way more than others. So we need to kind of be able to differentiate, not just that it's a serious crisis that we're in that has to do with the heating atmosphere and the environmental breakdowns that are caused by it, but also by the differentiated responsibilities that we have to do something about it. So thank you for that question.
Okay. Yeah, and also thank you for calling out we're all in this together, because your closing slide even shows, no, we're not. Actually, there's responsibility. So yeah, we can segment that.
We all have a role, and some of us should really be taking it more seriously. Yeah.
That's right. In the beginning of your lecture, you talked a little bit about that you were contacted and asked to sort of contribute to this report, to this piece of work. Can you share a little bit more about that, about how you got involved and what the process was like?
Well, I don't really know exactly how the government of Canada decides which names of academics to forward. I mean, I think that you have to have a history of doing research in areas that are related, and that those areas of research probably need to jive with what the Ipcc is looking for. They may have more people, I don't know, maybe they have more atmospheric chemists and fewer social scientists. The social science chapter was created from nothing, this time around. So probably governments all over the world were asked, do you have any social scientists who you would like to put forward? I did receive an email asking if I would be interested in being considered and asking for my CV, so I sent it to them then. But I really don't know exactly how they chose who they suggested. I will say that I have done work for more than 20 years now on climate-related and water governance issues with research partners in Latin America and in Africa. So it could be possible that they were looking for people with a kind of an international perspective on these things, that we're just going to say Canada, and we don't have to do anything about the tar sand, which of course I'm not in that category. So yeah, I don't know exactly. I don't know.
Okay. Well, like I said, I'm just really glad that you're a part of it, and that you're also part of this community to help us, to bring us closer to it. So one of the things that another question, one of the things you mentioned is that 2050 is the timeline we should be viewing as the deadline. What will the climate look like if the changes you've recommended are not taken seriously and put into action?
So the best source of information about that is the IPCC's we call it the 1.5 report. It came out in 2018 and it caused a big splash. I think the UN Secretary General also, dramatized the seriousness of this question. But the 1.5 report was the one which actually took a look at what the difference would be in terms of impacts across the world of a 1.5 degree increase in global warming versus a 2 degree or higher increase in global warming. And the differences are stark. So at the Paris Climate Change Conference in 2015, the governments set there was a lot of back and forth about what the target was going to be that the international community could agree on, and the compromise decision was it has to be no more than 2 degrees, and let's aim for 1.5. So the 1.5 report was really dramatizing the difference between those two. It sounds like only half a degree, but it really makes quite a big difference in terms of ecosystems, species extinction, and effects on human lives and economies. The reason I think that governments want 2 degrees to be what we are actually striving for at the outside limit is that emissions are actually increasing globally. They aren't falling. And if we take a business as usual approach and just sort of move those lines out into the future, it's going to be more like 4 or 3 degrees, not 2. So the idea is we have to do a lot. And this is why that quote that I showed you at the end about a 40 to 70% reduction in carbon emissions by 2050, that would be sufficient to bring us within the range of a 2-degree warming. And sort of that's about at the outside edges of what human society could tolerate without major changes. And the other thing I have to say is that some of this is unknown. We don't really know about things like the overturning meridional current in the North Atlantic, which would involve ending the jet stream. And that's if so much ice in the Arctic melts that cold fresh water comes down into the North Atlantic and keeps the Gulf and basically stops the Gulf Stream, then all bets are off. That means Europe is totally, that would change world weather patterns in a way that we really don't even have a way of modeling. I mean, people are trying, but it would be a drastic change. So there are things like that, tipping point things that really throw all modeling and projection type predictions into a cocked hat. And I think scientists and even government officials who talk about this don't want to go there. But I wanted this talk to be an upbeat talk. We can do stuff. If there are many doom and gloom predictions about this, and please look at the Ipcc 1.5 report if you want to understand more about that.
Okay, we'll do. And we do share links with everybody that's come today. We send an email out after with links to this, so we can sort of get more in depth there. Can you talk a little bit, so you said we want to sort of keep it hopeful in what we can do. Can you talk a little bit about some of the most important things that we can do here in this country about climate change?
Well, the slide that I showed about Indigenous climate action and land defenders and the blockades, there are, in any political environment, there's a spectrum where different people are comfortable with different degrees of action. We're all voters. We're all consumers. Some of us own houses. Some of us are workers. So we can fold climate conscious decision making into our lives that are part of our normal consumption decisions about our child raising and the way we get to work, whether we ride the transit, whether we fly somewhere for a holiday every year. We can all use a carbon footprint calculator, which are freely available online, to figure out what our own carbon footprint is, see what the major contributors to that carbon footprint are, and therefore take rational steps to move down from one of those 18.5 ton people to like a 10-ton person or an 8-ton person, right? These are decisions that we can make. I think that there are also big changes in the works around the politics of climate change. I think it's becoming not acceptable for governments to just sort of turn a blind eye and to only listen to those fossil fuel lobbyists. Those days are over, even in Canada. I think we're seeing big changes in Alberta, within the Alberta economy. And the other slide that I put up showing how wind and solar power are so cheap in Alberta, right? They're even cheaper in Alberta than they are in Ontario because of geographic conditions, right? There's huge plains, there's lovely spaces for solar arrays. They get a lot of wind in Alberta. And so, in fact, and this could be politically very convenient, it would be easy for Alberta to make a switch to renewables, to create those jobs, to build those renewable power plants, to even shut down the tar sands in a process. You know, I'm not saying that it should happen overnight or that it should happen in a way that doesn't take the needs of the society into account, the workers, the people, and also even the people who have come from other parts of the country to work in that industry. Maybe Alberta will soon be the renewables center of Canada, just as it's now the fossil fuels center of Canada. Who knows?
Right. Ironic.
Yeah.
Another question for you related to what we can do. Obviously, we're in, I guess sometimes it's a matter of opinion. Are we post-COVID or not? But we're in a stage of sort of health and social and economic response and recovery. How does that relate to addressing climate change?
I think that the COVID pandemic has shown at least two really important things for the climate transition, for the energy transition. The first is that I would never believe that governments could just be handing out money, like, you know, without worrying about the debt. Where are they getting this money from? But, you know, the CERB and all the benefits that they provided to people to keep the economy rolling during the pandemic made it clear that if governments want to do something, they have the deep pockets to do it, right? And so that, to me, is indicative that if they really want to change our infrastructure and put money into the energy transition, it's available to them. They can do that. And so we need to push harder as voters and as activists that they really take that seriously and understand we're expecting you to be the leaders here, because those systems transitions require some planning. They require, you know, complex interaction between all the parts. The second thing that COVID showed us has to do with supply chains. When we realized that if you know, like, you can't even fix your bicycle because the inner tube has to come from China or whatever, you know, it just kind of, I think people didn't realize the extent to which our economy has become this finely tuned, just in time, nobody really knows how to do anything from beginning to end anymore type economy. And that is not socially sustainable. And it's really not the kind of economy, as I tried to point out, for a post-carbon transition, because the supply chains have to become shorter. So I think COVID has sort of nudged us quite strongly in that direction of making supply chains more local and paying more attention from the level of consumers to the level of government planners to how those supply chains are working for people.
Right.
Both of those things are relevant to the transition.
Right. Okay. And, you know, I appreciate that, because there's talk around how our life before COVID wasn't normal. Like, we thought it was normal, but it actually was. And you look at it through this lens that you're talking to us, it just proves that even more. There was nothing normal about how we operated. And this was a massive disruption that, you know, can show us actually what we need to do and how we need to make different decisions, you know? So
yeah, what you've said is actually a third thing, which is, you know, the big shock of COVID is nothing compared to the kind of shock we will be experiencing worldwide if climate change isn't really addressed pretty soon.
Right.
So do we like that? If not, let's do something about it. You know, let's plan and reduce our risk to other kinds of impacts, not just by wearing masks, but also paying attention to the carbon emissions that are inexorably causing these other future crises to emerge.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for questions today. This has been such an interesting and informative time together. And like I said, we'll share all of the information that you shared with us with the audience as well. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. All the best, everyone.
Okay. Um, for those of you who would like to share today's sessions with friends and family who you know can start making different decisions, it will be posted on our YouTube page at youtube.com/YorkU alumni. You can also watch any of our past lectures that you might have missed there. One more question for you, and that is, how would you rate your knowledge of the topic following this discussion? It should pop up on your screen right now. Our next Scholars Hub at Home session is scheduled. It is a topic titled Harnessing the Power of AI for Flood Forecasting on Wednesday, July the 6th with Usman T. Khan, Associate Professor and Graduate Program Director at the Lassonde School of Engineering. You may register and learn more about these sessions at yorku.ca/alumni and friends. Until then, take care, keep well, and see you next time.